Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel Airbus What's It Doing Now, and this video is going to be all about the discussion items that are required as part of line training. So it'll be under the line training series part of the channel. So welcome to those who are new to the channel, and welcome to those who are just beginning their training with their respective airlines. Now this is all I can talk about is obviously my experience in my airline and how we go about some of our line training and some of the items that are discussed prior to safety pilot release or for final line check. This is obviously going to differ depending or from airline to airline, but I would suspect that it will be broadly similar. So of course, as always, government health warning, follow what your airline training footprint has provided for you when you begin line training with your own company. But hopefully, and some of the items that I'm going to discuss and talk with you about today will be required as part of your line training program. Some of these items must be completed prior to safety pilot release, and some of them can be discussed after. Now, the ones that I'm going to focus on today are the main discussion items. Other things such as external walk around, cockpit safety checks, opening and closing of the flight deck window, stuff like that. You can read this as well as anybody in your operations manual, and it should be pretty self-explanatory. What I'm going to talk about here is the discussion items of incapacitation and emergency descent. Both of those items need to be discussed prior to safety pilot release. It's just in the event of an emergency descent or a trainer becomes incapacitated, the trainee needs to be able to bring the aircraft down for whatever flight level, divert and make a suitable or make an approach to a suitable airport. So that needs to be discussed prior to safety pilot release. We're also going to take a look at weather radar and loss of comms. And in my experience, these are the big subjects that require the most understanding, certainly from a discussion point, and certainly from a trainee's perspective in terms of their input. So perhaps some visibility on these subjects, on knowing what you need to do, prepare for before you commence your line training. Hopefully you will be better prepared. As I say, this is experience from our company. It might differ for you, but the hope is that at least you get something from it, and they might be broadly similar. So, like I said, incapacitation, emergency descent, weather radar, its practical use, and loss of comms. And the idea here is to add a little bit of meat on the bone and give you something to prepare for, but also give you a few little hints and tips for you to consider when your training captain asks your understanding of a particular procedure or aircraft system, and you might be able to add a little bit more with having had the time to prepare than being asked the question on the line as the first time you may have heard of it. So let's talk about incapacitation first. So this is you're in the cruise and suddenly the training captain becomes incapacitated. Now, we know that incapacitation can take on many forms. Some are obvious and some not so obvious, and that takes some sort of thought as well, because incapacitation, and I don't want you to think that incapacitation just takes on one form, where the other pilot becomes physically incapacitated or faints or becomes unconscious. Incapacitation can take on many forms, and some of the cues can be more difficult to to understand. But I'm going to talk today about a full physical incapacitation. Okay, the training captain becomes incapacitated. What are the first things that we need to consider? And this might be how the conversation is started with your training captain. Okay, so some of the things to think about. The very first thing that we need to do is to make sure that the training captain is removed from the controls, if you like. Their seat back, the seat is retracted away from the controls, and their hands are away from the controls, as well as their feet from the rudder pedals. We're going to make sure that they are looked after, so we're going to try and request some medical assistance from the cabin crew, and probably the good way to do that would be to call them onto the interphone and just explain what's happened, ask them to come into the flight deck, usual cockpit door procedures of course, and see if they can administer some therapeutic oxygen, and obviously assist in moving them away from the controls as well as necessary. So that's our first thing, basically, is to secure the potential threat there of falling onto the controls, and also to apply some very early and very basic medical attention to the pilot. The next thing we need to do then is think about, well, how are we going to manage this now? We're now effectively single pilot, so now it's a task, assigning tasks, as we have done with the cabin crew, to make sure that they're looked after medically. Also calling ATC, probably at this point putting out a PAN, and that you have pilot incapacitation and that you are currently single pilot, to try and get the most amount of help from ATC as possible. Now, at this point then, we're probably going to think about diverting the aeroplane. Have you got all the latest weathers? Now, as part of the line training series, I've done some videos on some of the tasks that you would look to achieve en route. One of them is getting the weathers, but also making a note of the runway in use, the type of approach to be expected, so that if anything untoward was to happen, and I think in these cases we spoke about passenger sickness or something like that for a diversion, you've got a list of weathers here that are airports that you would consider to be suitable, and you know the runway and use and the type of approach to expect. So your situation has improved quite a lot. Also, you're thinking about airports in terms of suitability, to make sure that they're not restrictive in any way, such as they might be Cat C airports, for example, that might preclude you from flying into. So ideally, we won't want to choose those airports. So think about airport suitability. Plan a diversion. Think about using the secondary flight plan. So copy the active from where you are at this point, put a new destination in there and a new arrival and ILS as to what you would expect to fly. Consider getting some help as well. So at the minute you're single crew. So is there anybody on board the aeroplane that is, or is there a pilot on board the aeroplane that works for the company that has their ID with them? Because if you can get another captain in the flight deck, then that's going to make your life a whole lot easier. Or even another first officer, another pilot, just to help you manage this situation. Now, we do have a lot of pilots who travel with us on holidays, or they are commuting, and they usually are pretty good at making themselves known to the cabin crew, largely because they want a free bottle of water or a free cup of tea. But if they are on board and the cabin crew remember them, then of course it might be that you're able to ask for their assistance. There's something else there to think about. What else have we got here? So plan your arrival, get as much help from ATC as possible. Once you've got the aircraft to a point when you start the approach, what happens then if the captain wakes up? What if he just says, oh, right, sorry about that, I feel absolutely fine now, where are we? Yeah, okay, good decision, I have control, and I'll continue the approach. What are you going to do if that situation arises? Are you going to relinquish control to the captain, or would the better course of action perhaps to be, well, whatever caused incapacitation may well happen again, may happen at a critical stage of the approach. So would it be better for you to continue and have them operating as a pilot monitoring capacity? The other things you want to think about as well is you're going to need some assistance on the ground, particularly if you are unfamiliar with an airport. And remember, you will be taxiing the aeroplane to an appropriate stand. So once you've vacated the runway, have a follow me to take you to the stand. And also remember that the guidance that's provided is also going to be set up for the captain. So you'll want to think about marshalling on stand as well. And of course, discussing with air traffic and with the airport how you're going to get the medical attention to the captain. Okay, so some of the things to think about there for an incapacitation: initially getting the assistance to the captain that's become incapacitated, removing them from the controls, getting as much help as possible, using ATC as much as possible by perhaps declaring a PAN at this point that you're single crew, and choosing a suitable airport and using the secondary flight plan if necessary in order to assist in that planning process. But the story doesn't finish there. It's, you know, what do we do when we're on the ground? What help can we get? How are we going to taxi the stand? They're the sort of things to be thinking about. So that's incapacitation, just some of the things that you might want to consider when you're discussing that with your trainer. Emergency descent is another thing. Now, it may be that it's assumed that the captain is out of the cockpit, perhaps in the forward toilet or something, or out in the forward galley, and you're assuming that you have a loss of cabin pressure or an explosive depressurization, for example, and so you're handling this on your own. Okay, so it's assuming worst case scenario. Want to discuss how you're going to don your oxygen mask, how you're going to manage your headset, how you get the mask and how you put it on, attach it to yourself. Making sure that obviously it is on 100%. We'll talk about more of that in a moment. And then you've got the first actions, and then of course the secondary actions. The first one's obviously to get the aircraft going down with turn, pull, pull, and the seatbelt signs going on. Remember, in the UK, the recommendation is to maintain heading, and obviously look at what the country that you're flying in, what their recommendation is. But for the large part, it's normally turning off, ideally turning away from terrain. That's a consideration, and from any weather, obviously. But in the UK, it is to continue on with your current heading. Consider the terrain. Can you actually descend to flight level 100? Obviously, it might be that you can't, and that you have to go slightly higher than that. That's obviously a consideration. There's lots of information in the FCTM about this and operational recommendations. One of them is speed control. What happens if we descend at a constant Mach? Now, if you are in the cruise, it will be a Mach number. If you descend at a Mach number, a constant Mach number, then obviously the TAS is going to increase. And this might need some management, particularly if you expect some airframe damage. The best thing may well be to keep your current speed, in which case then you can use the Mach speed changeover button, and that will change from Mach to speed, and that might be something you want to think about, particularly if it is an explosive decompression. If there was a big bang, for example, that might be something from an airmanship point of view, a thing worth considering. You might not know this if it's your line training, but from some historical knowledge of the FCOM, but the QRH also used to say speed brake consider. Well, it's now speed brake full. Be careful of this. Obviously, when you apply full speed brake, particularly when you're heavy and particularly when you're flying close towards the operational maximum flight level, the VLS is going to increase. It increase no matter what condition of flight you're in. VLS will increase when you extend the speed brakes. Now, again, some useful information here in the FCTM talking about the speed brake. It doesn't. Attention to the VLS is basically what it says, or words to that effect, to avoid activation of the alpha prot, because the trouble there is that and also bear in mind, if the autopilot in the auto thrust is in, you will keep that when we're carrying out the emergency descent. If you go into alpha prot, then the autopilot will disconnect. The protection will then come into play, and part of that protection will be the speed brake is stowed, or that the spoilers are stowed, even with the speed brake out, which is obviously not what we want if we want in an emergency descent. So avoid going into alpha prot. Basically, VLS isn't a problem. Alpha prot is the bigger issue for those two reasons, and then you won't be able to have a speed brakes again for about 10 seconds after you are clear of the alpha protection. So how long will it take to get down from a typical cruise altitude to flight level 100? Well, if you're at a high speed emergency descent, i.e. maybe a structural issue isn't a consideration for you, you can expect a rate of descent of around 7,000 feet per minute. I'm going to pause the video there because I've got a phone call. Okay, right, so sorry about that, back to where we were. So yes, you can expect a rate of descent of around 7,000 feet per minute. It's going to take about 4 minutes then to descend to flight level 100, and approximately 40 miles distance covered. That just gives you an idea to increase your SA. What if you get a TCAS? Well, avoidance takes priority. That's the next thing to remember. When you're below 10,000 feet, it is safe then to remove your oxygen masks. And how the question might be then, how do you return comms then to the headphone mic boom? By closing the oxygen mask doors, the left door, and if you press the reset button, the flag should disappear, and then you're able to resume communications through your headset boom. You also then want to think about talking to the cabin crew and finding out what the state of the cabin is. Have they seen any obvious damage? Is a window gone or a door gone? What's the state of the passengers? Do we have any injuries? That sort of thing. And then, of course, you can liaise with ATC about your diversion and what assistance you might need. This is probably a good time to get a heads up on how to select diluted oxygen from the 100%. Now, when you pull the mask out of its box, the red button underneath the chin there will be pushed in order so that you get an initial application 100%. Just have a little think about how you get to dilute it. So it's actually easier to look at the oxygen mask, but obviously you'll have it on your head at this point. But the way to do it, the easiest way to do it, and I've covered this on oxygen systems, I'll try and put a link in here, is to follow the hose up, the oxygen hose up, with your thumb underneath your chin, and go just to the right, and you'll feel the slider. You just pull it down, and that goes into diluted. So pushes 100, and then just click it down, that gets you into diluted. And then if you follow that further back, there's the red button where if you turn that I think it's clockwise, that will go, you can only go one way anyway when it's at this position. That will then put you under emergency oxygen, and that will be positive pressure. So it'll just keep basically flowing. It won't be on demand as you inhale, it suck the air in or open the valve to allow the air to move. It won't operate like that. It will just be constantly on. That's 100% emergency. But when that's off, if you just push it up, okay, that will just blast the air into the goggles in case they become foggy, or if you're in a smoke situation, for example, and there was some smoke in there or some fumes, that would enable you to clear the mask. So a useful function. Good. Okay, so that is emergency descent and some of the things that you might want to think about. One of the other questions, discussion points, is the weather radar and a practical understanding. Now, I've covered weather radar, and I've also covered wind shear, predictive, and reactive. So again, I'll put a link up here for you. So if you want a deeper understanding and knowledge of it, then of course this will help you. Hopefully. Again, as with all these subjects, it's more of a practical understanding of their operation and what would you do in the event of. When we're looking at weather radar here, you might get asked a question basically how it works, and do you understand the difference between weather radar, predictive wind shear and reactive wind shear, because there are some significant differences in terms of how we respond to alerts, cautions, and how we react to warnings. Okay, so we'll come on to that in more detail. So essentially what we're looking to discuss here is how the weather radar system works. Okay, we're not trying to rebuild the thing, but essentially a beam is sent out. The strength of that return gets shown to us on the ND through a color gradient going from a green, if you like, to the lightest type of precipitation, and then all the way to red and magenta for the most heavy. The gradient between those colours, obviously the steeper the gradient, the more developed the cell is on that side. Now the weather radar has a and that's essentially how the weather radar works. The strength of the return is color coded, and that gives us an idea of the severity of the weather. I'll talk about gain, etc. in just a minute, but that's essentially how the weather radar is working. There are limitations to the weather radar. One of them is it can't pick up ice crystals. Okay, it doesn't get a return of ice crystals, only off of water droplets. So do be aware that when you're scanning for weather, it might be that you're not able to pick. You might pick up the top of the CB in terms of its convectivity, but the very tops of it that might remain as ice crystals in the higher levels, you might not be able to see, and that could present its own problems in itself. But the weather radar has a tilt function, which will depend on the weather radar fit. So there are a number of different variants here. They're all essentially doing the same job, but how you operate it might be very different. Some of the weather radar fits will have an automatic tilt. The older systems will have a manual tilt, and that can be displayed as a number of degrees. Okay, on the older fits, and actually that again may be manually or automatically set, and also it may be shown as a flight level, and the newer systems enables you to split the screens as well. So there's one weather radar, one could be on scanning for different flight levels, one can be en route weather, one can be all weather, so you can play about there with what presentations you want. So I would suggest probably just going into the weather radar and the FCOM and having a look at the various different fits and what that looks like in your aircraft. So when you come to see, oh, okay, I know this is the old system and it's going to go up and down in degrees. This is another variant of that which has the automatic tilt, so I can see how that works. And this is the latest standard which enables us to independently scan weather in different forms. Okay, so at least you've got an understanding and how and what the various panels look like, so it's not all too alien to you when you first come to have a look at it. So, as I say, take a deeper look into the FCOM for a better understanding of those systems. But essentially, looking at the operation recommendation, when we take off, setting the weather radar somewhere around 4 degrees is broadly accepted as a a decent setting to pick up the worst or the most of the weather and avoid immediate the topography and the immediate terrain. Now, if you're departing out of Geneva, for example, somewhere that has high terrain, then you might want to set that slightly higher so you get rid of a lot of that ground clutter. So 4% is for most situations is broadly accepted as a good start. And then every 10,000 feet which you climb, you would then just sort of tilt the radar down by 1 degree. So 4 degrees as you start off, and then as you get to your cruise level, we'll have something slightly negative set, which I'll come on to the reasons for doing that in a moment. Again, check your company SOP. It might be that one of you would be on 160 miles, the other one might be on 80 miles. The idea here is to have the weather radar in the cruise at a slight negative setting in order to have ground returns just on the outside perimeter of your range setting. The idea of that is that if anything marches out from the perimeter towards the aircraft, then it's going to be weather. Okay, and as it starts to come towards you, it leaves a space behind. Obviously, that's no longer terrain. If it's coming towards you at that constant setting, then it's likely that it's weather. That's the idea behind that. So have a slightly negative setting, so you've got terrain on the perimeter. Anything that marches out from that perimeter is likely to be weather. So that's the practical use of it, and as you descend, you then start to wind that up 1 degree until such time as you make your approach. Be really proactive with the weather radar. When I look outside today, it's clear skies everywhere, so it's going to be very difficult. And when you come to at a discussion point on this, if you are flying around on a clear day, it might not be the best day to discuss it, but a good understanding of this and a good working knowledge of it and its practical application will serve you well when weather becomes an issue. There are some other functions as well. Most of the time it's on weather and turbulence, showing the magenta for extreme weather or turbulence. You've also got the option of ground mapping. I must admit, I don't use that very often. All that essentially does is it changes the beam width and enables you to have a more accurate depiction of where the terrain is. It's particularly useful when you're looking at where the coast is and where the land and the coast meet. That can sometimes be useful for situational awareness. But again, you've got a terrain function for that. So I'm not entirely convinced of its use. Again, I can only speak of our operation. Those of you that operate around the world might have a better understanding of that in terms of its usage, as your operation might be different and may require it perhaps. But please do put your comments in here if you find that you've had a particularly useful function for that. I said I was going to talk about the gain function on the weather radar, and I completely forgot. So the gain function is very useful if you've got a lot of weather around and a lot of sort of weather clutter, and you're trying to depict the sort of the path of least resistance, etc. So you kind of want to get rid of the greens and some of the yellows to sort of get towards the sort of weather that you really want to avoid, and the clusters of the deeper amber and reds and magentas. And the gain can be a useful function with that. So adjusting the gain will help you choose a better path, particularly if the weather radar, a lot of the time, if it's sort of a stratocumulus or nimbostratus, sort of heavy rain-bearing cloud, typical of sort of warm sector fronts, and the radar screen is covered in green and amber, just adjusting the gain there will help you decipher which is the most important weather that you wanted to avoid. The other useful function of that, of course, is that if you have a CB and you chose that path, adjusting the gain will make sure that you're looking behind that weather as well, to make sure that the path that you've chosen is a most appropriate path. So 2 reasons for it really: decluttering it so that you can find the worst of the weather, and also able to look behind a CB by varying that gain to make sure there's nothing more severe behind it, or should I say, when you've chosen that path, that there's nothing nasty behind it. So another useful function of the gain for you. So the weather radar has another function, which is the predictive wind shear. So you might get asked about this, the difference between predictive and reactive. You might get asked things like, what alerts might we see on takeoff, on approach, and what's the guidance in the FCTM. When is it active, or when is predictive wind shear inhibited? If you get a wind shear ahead, what precautions can we take in terms of speed, avoidance? If it's expected that you might see it on approach, what are the recommended operational considerations in terms of speed and landing config? And a good question is, what would you do if you get a go around wind shear ahead? What sort of go around is that? And can these alerts be disregarded, and under what conditions can they be regarded? Okay, so well worth having a look through the FCT and the FCTM and the FCOM. Now that's predictive wind shear. What about reactive wind shear, and how does that work? And you might be asked to go through some of the memory items associated with a wind shear warning, and the differences between the predictive and the reactive wind shear. What system is the reactive wind shear working on? Now that might be a little bit too deep. You might not get asked that, but your knowledge of a predictive and a reactive wind shear, the fact that they are different and the procedures are different, and that the reactive wind shear, obviously the aircraft is in wind shear. The predictive wind shear is obviously looking at Doppler shift, basically in seeing that there might be a gradient in the wind, and that's where it gives you the caution. And there are procedures associated with that. But the reactive wind shear, the aircraft is obviously detected the wind shear, and the energy state has changed, and of course that's very different to the predictives, and different procedures associated with that. Okay, so just take your time to have a look at that. Okay, so that you're better informed when you have to come and discuss wind shear, weather radar, I should say. One of the other items discussed is the practice Autoland. We as a company like to get this done before safety pilot release. We like to get it done before actual low vis operations or low visibility procedures, so that it's done as a practice before you do it in anger. So the practice Autoland will be done typically in Cat 1 conditions or better, and you will set the aircraft as a Cat 1 approach, but we'll overlay the Autoland, and we will allow the aircraft to carry out the Autoland so that you get practice on the extra calls that are required for the Cat 3. But of course, if you're not visual at the Cat 1 minima, then a go around will be executed or expected, because the airport won't be in low vis ops. There's no point telling the airport that you're doing a practice Autoland, because there's not much they can do about it. If they're not in LVPs, aircraft won't be at the Cat 2, Cat 3 holding points. They'll be at the Cat 1, so there might be some interference, and this is why it's a practice. And if the aircraft doesn't respond as it should do, then provided you're visual at that point, obviously you'll continue to land the aircraft manually. But critically, the important thing to remember is that unless the airport is in low visibility procedures, then it'll be a Cat 1 approach, essentially, with a Cat 3 overlay to look at the differences. So some of the questions that might come from this is, what is the significance of the approach ban? What is the definition of alert height for Cat 3 fail operational aircraft? What is meant by monitored and non-monitored items, and where would we find that information? What is the effect of a downgrade between the approach band and alert height? That's a downgrade of landing capability, obviously, for a monitored item. Yeah, again, the same question for non-monitored items. Where would you find that information? What does the Autoland, well, when does the Autoland light arm, and what failures, for what failures would it illuminate? Another question might be, below alert height and we get a downgrade, can we continue the approach, or when would we go around? Where would we find the information that items required for Cat 2, Cat 3 approaches? And where would you find the low visibility operations for takeoff and landing and the standard calls to be made? So good sort of robust understanding of low visibility procedures, where you find the information. What does the approach band mean? What does the alert height mean? What happens between approach band and alert height with a downgrade? What happens below alert height with a downgrade? When does the Autoland light become armed, and what would it illuminate for? Okay, so that would be, and then where you find the information about the extra standard calls and what the items that are required for Cat 2, Cat 3, and the difference between monitored and non-monitored items. I think if you came to your line training flight armed with that information, when you have to discuss the low visibility ops with your training captain, I should imagine you'd be very pleased that you've done your homework. Good. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to talk to you about. Then the last thing is, where would you find information on failed or downgraded equipment? There's a table, and depends on what your airline uses. We use Lido, so just see if you can dig out, and I'll recommend that you bookmark that page because when you need it, it's a pig to find. Okay, basically. So depending on what platform you're using, that might be a bit difficult to find. So I would bookmark it so that you can have access to that, because obviously when you're reading through the NOTAMs, if an outer marker or a middle marker is unserviceable, or runway edge lighting or centerline lighting is compromised, that is going to have an effect on your landing capability, and it may be that you downgraded from Cat 3 to Cat 2 or even Cat 1, depending on what it is. So checking of the NOTAMs is a very important part of that low vis briefing. Okay, and obviously that's something that you will look at before you commence your approach, especially if you're looking at a low vis operations. And the last thing to talk about is loss of comms, ICAO Doc 4444. So before launching into the standard loss of comms procedure, what practical things can we do before we have to start digging the manuals out? It's probably recommended that both pilots attempt the comms through their own ACP. So if you're on VHF1, both pilots try. It may be that it's a problem with the trigger on the side stick. That may have been an issue. Try VHF2 again, both pilots, and VHF3 if necessary. It might be that you can try 121.5. It has happened in the past where ATC have forgotten about an aircraft, or crew have been otherwise preoccupied and on a particular frequency, and the range on a particular VHF station, assuming no obstacles, is not much more than a couple of 100 miles. So you can cover that distance fairly quickly, and in 20 minutes or so, if you might find yourself 20 minutes, half an hour, you might find yourself out of range for that VHF station that you were tuned into, and no amount of calling on that frequency is going to help. And in which case, then, if you suspect that's the problem, it might be worth contacting 121.5 to see if you can get any response there. Transponder then obviously to the loss of comms at 7600. So they're the initial actions before having to dive into Lido or whatever other platform that you use for your loss of comms procedure. Anything else I can give you there? No, I think that's probably it. Of course, if you have ACARs, it might be that you can contact your operations team and you can let them know that your last frequency, you're not able to speak to anybody, you suspect a loss of comms, and it might be that they can contact the relevant services for you. If you are using Lido, there is, and you suspect that you're out of VHF range, if you just tap on the area of the map where you suspect your position to be, it will bring up a separate table. If you click on the tab COM, it'll give you a list of VHF frequencies, and you're able then just to select them, and when you select them, it'll highlight the area of the map that particular ATS is responsible for, and choosing one of those frequencies at an appropriate level should be able to restore comms if you suspect that you've just gone out of VHF range, basically. So I think to have a complete loss of comms on an aircraft takes an awful lot. That the most likely is you've just gone out of VHF range, and trying all the boxes, attempting 1215, and then using Lido to find an appropriate frequency. That may well restore things for you. If not, and you've tried everything, then straight to 7600, and that will highlight on the radar screens for air traffic services that that's why they haven't been able to contact you, or that's why you've not been in contact. So yes, using the Lido is really good, and that might be all you need in order to re-establish two-way comms. Again, depending on the airspace, whether procedural separation or ATS surveillance is in use will depend on how long you maintain your assigned level and speed, and that can vary between 7 and 20 minutes depending on that airspace, and the time is from the point at which you selected 7600. The recommendation then is to continue with the flight plan and to arrive over a fix which serves an airport and probably the termination of a star, or where the clearance limit might be, and then to descend in the hold and to make an approach as close to the expected approach time, if that was given, or as close as possible to the expected arrival time according to your flight plan, and certainly best practice to arrive there within 30 minutes. Each airport will have its own loss of comms procedure for both departure and arrival. So what we've spoken about there is the general ICAO ruling, and that's what the ATS would expect you to do. When you get to an airport, they may have their own specific procedures. So your trainer might ask you, where would you find that information? That will be in the airport AOI. Look under loss of comms for arrival, and it'll say what holding point they want you to go to and how they expect you to transition onto final approach. And it's worth knowing that for the airport you're going to, and obviously for your home base. You wouldn't be expected to memorize that for every airport you go to, but just some knowledge, certainly of your home base and the airport you're flying to on the day, could be quite useful as if you're reading through. They should be broadly similar, but of course each airport has its own approach aids, and you'll be expected to go to different holds as necessary. So guys, that's basically all I wanted to talk to you about. As I said, there are other things in there like the flight deck window, the cockpit security check, the exterior walk around. You can read up on that. That doesn't really need much expansion on. I just thought I'd go through some of these topics here and some extra bits and pieces there to put some meat on the bone, as I like to refer to it as, to give you guys a little bit of help and on a heads up of the sort of things that you're going to be talking about, and the level of detail that would be useful for you to know when you're discussing it with your trainer, so you get maximum benefit from those discussion points. Remember, they are discussion points. You're not tested on these things. You're not expected to do an emergency, anything crazy like that. But the trainer just needs to know that you have a fairly robust understanding of these procedures, because when the safety pilot goes, then you're operating there as a, in inverted commas, normally constituted crew, and you might be expected to carry out these actions, and they want to make sure that they are robust enough and discussed to proficiency before the safety pilot is released. Enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. It's a very steep learning curve, and hopefully you'll find the material that I've put on the channel of use. There's lots of it under the line training heading, so take from it what you need. Enjoy the flying, stay safe, keep the plate spinning, and I look forward to seeing you on another episode in the very near future. Thanks very much. Bye for now.